Hello everybody, thanks for stopping by. This is John Palafis again from the Zero Hour Mint. It's Martin Luther King Day 2015. I wanted to put out some numbers for you so we could discuss them as quickly as possible. I don't want to bore you for more than a few minutes here. We have debt outstanding here in the United States of $18.1 trillion. And to put that into a little perspective, because people can't get their hands around $18.1 trillion. That's what $18.1 trillion looks like when you write it out. Now, none of us listening has any chance of earning that in our lifetimes. Hopefully we'll never owe that much money like the United States. And it is a huge amount of money. It is actually larger than what the United States produces every year, which is about $17.5 trillion. So our debt is larger than what we actually produce every year in the United States. That has only been surpassed by a couple other countries around the world, including Great Britain and Japan. Two countries that I would put on an even keel with the United States in terms of how bad their finances are. But they have some special situations, especially Japan, where they borrow money for the most part from their own citizens and their own companies. We, on the other hand, borrow from the whole world. Out of that $18 trillion in debt, $13 trillion of that debt is actually publicly held debt by countries, by individuals, by companies, by pension funds, profit-sharing accounts. And banks, of course, invest in that debt, and that is the interest that you receive on your savings accounts. On that $13 trillion, the government paid $430 billion in interest expense last year. $430 billion. Keep in mind that interest rates are very, very low right now, historically low rates. And as time goes on, if rates were to return to a more normal 20, 30-year run rate, we could see rates at 2 or 3 times what they are today. The $5 billion difference, before I forget about it, the $5 billion difference, the $18 billion versus the $13 billion, that is $5 billion that has been paid to the government in FICA taxes, basically, and Medicare taxes, that goes into the government. They have instantly spent that money, and that money is owed to the Medicare Trust Fund and the Social Security Trust Fund. As you can imagine, there is no trust fund. There are no giant piles of cash. If Medicare needed $5 billion out of, if that was their total, $4 billion, let's say, the U.S. government would print it or create it in the banking industry and pay it out so retirees would get their Social Security checks. I'll touch on Medicare in the future. That's a longer discussion that's worthy of talking all by itself. But getting back to the interest rates that I am seeing today, the federal funds rate is 0.25%. That is what the government sets as an interest rate for one bank to borrow money in the Federal Reserve banking system overnight from another bank. These are non-collateral loans, and they are all guaranteed by the Federal Home Loan Bank system, I believe. And that 0.25% is as low as it has ever been. I don't believe it's ever been lower here in the United States. In other countries right now, you've probably read about negative interest rates. These are countries that don't want money in their banking system, so they are basically telegraphing to all of their investors in bank accounts, checking accounts, go spend that money. We need you to spend the money. We don't need it in the banking system. And they are actually negative. Some countries are at almost 0.5% negative going out several years, meaning if you kept your bank account open with $100,000 at a negative 0.5% interest rate, you would pay that bank $500 to actually keep your money for that year, which is insane. There is a lot of money looking for homes, and there's nowhere to go. Granted, my choice of homes would be something like this, as I'm sure you knew was coming. The average 35-year average for the federal funds rate is 6%. Remember, I just said it was 1/4%. The average 30-year run rate, excuse me, I'm doing the numbers wrong. It's actually 45 years. 40 plus year federal funds rate has been averaging 6% over this time period. And today we're at 1/4%. If anybody out there knows me, I believe completely in reversion to the mean. Meaning if the average run rate is something closer to 6%, eventually we're going to get back to that average, and we're going to exceed it one day in the future. I don't know when, but we'll exceed it. That's what markets do. That's why when we had the housing bubble back in 2006, I was telling everybody homes don't inflate 5 or 10% a year, 15 or 20 if you're really good at house flipping. That was going to revert to the mean, and that is what we saw from 07, 08, 09, and a lot of people would argue that we're still in a bubble with a lot of the housing. So we have these issues, and one of the reasons that I started Zero Hour Mint was because I wanted to focus some people's attention on how silly this is. There's no way to pay down $18 trillion in debt. We're not going to grow our way out of it. We are not going to have other countries continue borrowing our money. They are going to run out of patience with us, and they are going to look at other avenues for their investments. It's pretty well known that Russia has been selling off treasuries to buy gold. Russia obviously has some issues with us outside of the finance world. China and Russia would love to start their own currency block and cut out the US dollar as a reserve currency. It's very well known, and nothing surprising there. And one of these days, what will happen, in my opinion, is our reliance on our own government to invest through these QE programs, the quantitative easing programs. These programs are going to continue. They have been stopped for the time being, but I don't think that they can continue to ignore the fact that we have a weak world economy, a weak U.S. economy, and we have a lot of issues that aren't going to go away, such as the $18 trillion in debt. Now, we're growing that by a minimum of $500 billion a year. And last year, I think we had a good year at 850 or 900 billion. I'd have to go check. We increased the debt by that much last year. Now, some things affect that more than others. When you're at war, of course, you're borrowing a ton of money, and we're somewhat shutting down some of the many wars that this country seems to want to be in. I'm not going to discuss wars. That's not what I'm here for. I want to discuss the finance portion of it. And I just want everybody to keep in mind that with these low interest rates, coupled with the increasing debt that we put on our U.S. balance sheet every year, something is going to give. The other number that I didn't touch on yet, and I will right now and try and wrap this up, is the fact that our average debt duration is about 3.5 years here in the United States. Debt duration is a somewhat complex finance term theory. It is the cumulative cash flow of all debt issued by a company or a country. And those cash flows include the interest that is paid on the debt every 6 months. And it also includes the principal payments. The smaller the number, the higher the turnover in debt. So basically, the average debt duration of today's $18 trillion is 3 to 3.5 years, which means that every 3.5 years, the country basically needs to refinance all of that debt. Now, it's a great thing when interest rates continue going lower, and that is somewhat being pushed by the governments around the world. The problem, of course, becomes a tragedy, really. I don't know if that's the best word to use. It could be just total chaos if interest rates were to go to 4 or 5% in the medium term, and we want to extend that duration from 3.5 to 5 to 10 years out on the curve. And all of a sudden, our interest expense goes from $430 billion to $800 billion, or $1 trillion a year. Now, if we're spending $1 trillion a year and this country takes in $3 to $4 trillion a year in tax revenue, plus we have Social Security and Medicare costs that don't seem to ever go down, nobody really expects them to go down anyway, we really have an issue here, and nobody is really focused on it. If you hear people in the media or politicians say that they are going to solve the debt crisis, I haven't a clue what they're talking about. I haven't heard a realistic statement about any of that in the last 10 years. And I think it's too late. I know that's, again, the gloom and doom, and I don't want to sound too gloomy, but they need to take drastic measures to fix our U.S. debt situation. And I think most people would agree with me and say that politicians just don't get it. I don't know if they don't want to get it or they just can't understand it. But we have a serious problem in this country, and no one seems to be addressing it. With that, let me cut this off today. I want to thank all of my distributors and, of course, the coin buyers. I've had some great feedback from all of you through various channels. I appreciate all of them. Until we see each other next time, stay safe. Thank you.